Yes, I mean, I dreamt of singing with him, but of course he died so young that obviously
Elvis we're talking about.
Elvis, yeah. To all of us, I guess, when we heard that had happened to him, and it took away the chances of me recording with him.
Picture this. One of the biggest music legends alive, 85 years old, knighted by the Queen, 250 million records sold, sits down in front of the cameras and casually drops a bombshell that leaves the entire internet absolutely losing its mind. We're talking about Sir Cliff Richard, Britain's eternal pop prince. And the bombshell? It's about the one man Cliff has spent his entire life idolizing, imitating, and, here's the tea, avoiding. Elvis Presley. The king, the man Cliff built his whole career on. So why on earth did Cliff turn his back on a chance to actually meet him? And what is he saying about it now, all these decades later? Buckle up, because this story is messier than anyone expected. The boy from Lucknow who dreamed of being Elvis. Let's start at the very beginning, because honestly, you cannot understand this story without understanding just how obsessively, pathologically in love with Elvis Presley Cliff Richard once was. We're not talking about casual fan love here. We're talking full-on, life-altering, identity-reshaping obsession. Cliff Richard was born Harry Roger Webb on October 14, 1940, in Lucknow, India. After moving to England, he grew up in modest circumstances in Hertfordshire, a perfectly ordinary British teenager in a perfectly ordinary world. And then, everything changed. On one Saturday morning in May 1956. That Saturday, Cliff, then still going by Harry Webb, was walking down Waltham Cross High Street with his pals Norman Mitham and Terry Smart. They spotted a parked green Citroën with its window open, and wafting out of that window was a sound none of them had ever heard before. The opening line of Heartbreak Hotel. Just that voice, that unmistakable, earth-shaking voice. Norman, Terry, and Cliff stared at each other, open-mouthed. A guy ran out of the newsagents, jumped in the car, and drove away, taking the music with him. They spent the whole afternoon trying to figure out what they had just heard. By Monday, Norman had tracked down the answer, announcing triumphantly that the song was called Heartbreak Hotel, and it was by some guy called Elvis Presley. And yes, they all laughed at the name. Elvis? Who gets called Elvis? Famous last words, honestly. Because from that moment on, as Cliff would later write in his memoir, Elvis immediately obsessed him. He started trying to find out everything about Elvis that he could. Cliff recalled how Elvis sounded passionate and powerful, like he had secrets you needed to learn. It wasn't even the lyrics that grabbed him, it was the rhythms, the beats, the feel, the attitude. Now, here's where it gets truly wild. This wasn't just musical admiration. This boy was committed. When Cliff finally saw a photograph of Elvis, he later wrote that he couldn't believe how cool he looked, the quiff, the curled lip. And when he realized Elvis had an album out, he absolutely had to have it. But there was a small problem: money. So what did young Harry Webb do? He got a holiday job picking potatoes on a local farm. There he was, all day long, bent double, and yanking spuds out of the dirt for a shilling an hour. He later recalled that the boredom and backache were all worth it when he finally saved up enough to buy the Elvis Presley album. A teenager picking potatoes in the mud for Elvis Presley. If that's not devotion, I don't know what is. But it didn't stop there. Oh no, Cliff didn't just want to sound like Elvis, he wanted to look like him too. He even started eating peanut butter and jam on toast after reading in a magazine that Elvis liked it. He later admitted it was an acquired taste, but said he managed to acquire it. He wore Elvis's favorite colors, pink and black. He vibrated his legs on stage. His dark hair would be immaculate at the start of a set, but after a few bars, it would begin to assume a carefully stage-managed kind of disorder. None of it left to chance. Cliff Richard was originally marketed as a rebellious rock and roll singer in the style of Presley. His 1958 hit, Move It, is often described as Britain's first authentic rock and roll record, and the nation ate it up. They started calling him the British answer to Elvis. They called him the English Elvis, a nickname that Cliff has spent decades both loving and gently pushing back on. As he has always maintained, he cannot be the answer to Elvis because Elvis is not a question. There is no answer to Elvis. He will always be the king of rock and roll. Which begs the question, if Cliff Richard worshipped this man so completely, if he literally picked potatoes in the mud to buy his records, if he styled every inch of himself to look and move like him, why, when the chance finally came to meet the king face to face, did Cliff say no? 3 chances? 3 misses. A story you won't believe. Here's what nobody fully realizes. Cliff Richard didn't just miss meeting Elvis once. He missed him 3 times. And each time, the story gets wilder. Miss number 1. The front door in Bad Nauheim. In the late 1950s, when Elvis was serving his military stint in Germany, Cliff was on a European holiday with Tony Meehan, the Shadows' drummer, and some friends. On the way back, someone suggested taking a small detour through Germany. And Cliff said they should go to Bad Nauheim and see if they could find Elvis. Now let that sink in. This is a rising pop star from England, essentially just deciding to drop by Elvis Presley's house, unannounced, with no invitation. Just vibes. It wasn't hard to find the right house. The walls were covered in graffiti, declaring love for Elvis. Cliff walked up to the door, stepped up the few stairs, and knocked. A large American man answered. Cliff asked whether Elvis was in. The man said he wasn't, then asked who Cliff was. Cliff told him he was a singer from England and asked if the man could pass on his hello. Cliff later laughed that it was so silly when he thought about it, and apparently they just ran off. They ran off. And here's the part that really makes you pause. This wasn't just some random fan having a fangirl moment and panicking at the door. This was Cliff Richard, the man who had already started building a career off the back of Elvis Presley's entire blueprint. The hair, the sound, the attitude, all of it traced back to that one voice coming out of a car window in 1956. And yet, when the moment actually arrived, when he was standing on the literal doorstep of his hero, something in him just short-circuited. Because meeting your idol is a funny thing. It sounds great in theory. In your head, it's perfect. You say the right thing, they smile. Maybe you even share a little moment that becomes a story you tell forever. But in real life, it's unpredictable. It's awkward, it's human, and maybe, deep down, Cliff didn't want to risk breaking the illusion. Because Elvis Presley wasn't just a person to him. He was everything Elvis represented. And sometimes, the idea of someone feels safer than the reality standing right in front of you. Britain's biggest pop star, future Knight of the Realm, knocked on Elvis's door and then ran away. I need a moment with that. Miss number 2. The book that wasn't the second missed connection is hazier but equally poignant. As Cliff has since recounted, there was a moment where something was in the works. A plan, but it just never happened. 2 global superstars orbiting each other, but never quite connecting. Miss number 3. The one that changed everything. And then came the big one. The one that went viral. The one that had the internet absolutely seething. It was while Cliff was in America promoting his hit, Devil Woman. A journalist who knew Elvis came to interview him and, aware of Cliff's admiration for the king, made an extraordinary offer, asking whether Cliff would like to meet him. Cliff said yes. Of course he said yes. This was his idol, the man he had literally dug potatoes out of the ground for, the man he had knocked on a stranger's door in Germany for. And then, at the end of the interview, Cliff told the journalist he wanted to put it off. His reason? Elvis had put on a lot of weight, and Cliff wanted the photograph to look a certain way. He explained that if he was going to have a photograph taken with Elvis, and it was going to be hanging on his refrigerator, then Elvis had to look good. He added that he put it off. And then, of course, Elvis died. Elvis Presley died on August 16, 1977. He was 42 years old, and just like that, every one of those chances, the door in Germany, the journalist's offer, all of it evaporated, gone forever. But wait, because it gets more complicated. Because Cliff didn't just keep this story to himself. He told it on national television with a smile. And that's when everything erupted. The interview that broke the internet. So here's where we fast forward to November 2023. Cliff Richard, now 83 at the time, is on This Morning, Britain's beloved daytime chat show. He's there to promote his memoir, A Head Full of Music, and a new album. Alison Hammond, one of the nation's most beloved hosts, is interviewing him alongside Dermot O'Leary. Also present as a guest editor that day, none other than Sarah Ferguson, the Duchess of York. A perfectly civilized morning of television, or so everyone thought. When Hammond asked if Cliff had ever met Elvis, he launched into the story of his one chance. He recalled the journalist, the offer, the opportunity, and then the reason he turned it down. He said Elvis had put on a lot of weight, and he wanted the photograph on his refrigerator to look good. The studio went a little quiet. You could almost hear Britain's collective eyebrow raise. The clip went viral almost instantly. Social media exploded. People accused Cliff of fat-shaming the late king of rock and roll. One commenter demanded to know who Cliff Richard thought he was to fat-shame Elvis Presley. Others, meanwhile, praised Alison Hammond for her reaction in the moment, calling her response to Cliff's remarks a quiet act of bravado. Now, to be fair, and this is a gossipy exposé, but it's also an honest one, there are a few things worth unpacking here. First, the context. Cliff told this story with no apparent awareness that it might land badly. He seemed genuinely caught up in the nostalgia of the memory, not trying to be cruel. Second, and this matters, the Elvis Presley of 1976 was a man in serious medical and personal crisis, struggling with prescription medication dependency, surrounded by yes men, increasingly isolated from the outside world. This wasn't just a celebrity who'd gained some weight. This was a deeply troubled human being in the final chapter of his life. And Cliff's comment, however carelessly delivered, managed to reduce all of that complexity to a question of how he'd look in a photo. The criticism was swift, it was loud, and it was largely deserved. But then something interesting happened. Cliff Richard, perhaps for the first time, started to really sit with what he'd done and what he'd missed. The regret, the reckoning, the reframe. Because here's the thing about Cliff Richard. At 85, he is still talking, still reflecting, still, it seems, haunted. In a subsequent interview on Gold Radio, Cliff opened up fully about the weight of his decision. He said that he regretted it because Elvis died not long after that, and none of them had known that was going to happen. He said he was stupid, and that he regretted it to that day. He admitted he would love to be able to say he had met Elvis, but he hadn't. That's not the breezy anecdote from This Morning. That is a man genuinely grieving a missed connection with someone who shaped his entire life. He also elaborated on the weight comment in this more somber context, explaining that he had turned down the chance because Elvis had put on a lot of weight at that stage. He said he had thought he would wait until Elvis did his next movie, because when Elvis made films, he dieted and went back to looking like the good old Elvis. But by putting it off, he had missed his opportunity. Because within a year of his being in America, Elvis died. And then came the line that perhaps redeems the whole sorry mess. The line that shows you Cliff Richard has genuinely learned something. He said he would give anything to go back and agree to take the picture. That he would rather have had a photograph with Elvis overweight than have none at all. There it is, the admission, the pivot. The lesson he is now, loudly and repeatedly, trying to pass on to anyone who'll listen. He has since told people everywhere that if they have somebody they like and they get a chance to have a picture taken with them, they should just do it. Now, it would be easy and rather satisfying, in a gossipy exposé kind of way, to simply roast Cliff for this and move on. But what's actually more interesting is why the story keeps coming back. Why, at 85, is Cliff Richard still talking about Elvis Presley? Why does he keep returning to this particular wound? The answer, it turns out, is more profound than any viral clip suggested. No Elvis, no Cliff. The debt he's never been able to repay. In his memoir, Cliff repeats a phrase again and again. No Elvis, no Cliff. That's not hyperbole. That's a sincere and carefully considered statement of fact. Because when you look at what Cliff Richard has built over 6+ decades, over 250 million records sold worldwide, more than 130 singles reaching the UK top 20. The only singer to have had a UK #1 in 5 consecutive decades. It all traces back to that green Citroen parked on a Hertfordshire street in May 1956. When Cliff first heard Elvis, he said it sounded like an alien art form. But the more he looked into it, the more he realized that hillbilly music, bluegrass, country, gospel, rhythm, and blues, it all went together and came back in the form of Elvis Presley. This was a revelation, not just musically, but personally. Cliff didn't hear Elvis and think he wanted to be famous. He heard Elvis and thought, I want to be that. I want to make people feel this way. As Cliff wrote in his memoir, Elvis sounded like he was singing for him. To him, nobody his age would ever have been inspired by Frank Sinatra or Bing Crosby, or wanted to be like them. Elvis was different. He sounded so young, so cool, and so present, and his voice cut through everything else. And the debt kept compounding, because it wasn't just Cliff who benefited from Elvis's existence. The entire British rock and roll scene, the very scene that would eventually produce the Beatles, the Stones, and the entire British invasion, needed that initial spark from Memphis. Cliff Richard dominated the British popular music scene in the pre-Beatles period of the late 1950s to early 1960s. He was, in many ways, the bridge, the proof of concept, Britain's demonstration that this American sound could be translated, adopted, and loved on the other side of the Atlantic. And he built all of that on the foundation Elvis laid. Even now, older, wiser, living between Portugal and Barbados, Cliff writes of many mornings when he wakes up and gazes out of his bedroom window at the Caribbean and wonders how he got from Cheshire to there. And the answer, every time, is Elvis Presley. That's not something you can tuck away neatly. That's a presence that follows you. That's a ghost you can never fully settle accounts with, especially when you never got to say thank you in person. And that is why the story of the missed meeting stings so deeply. It wasn't just a photo op, it was the one chance Cliff had to look his inspiration in the eye, shake his hand, and say, "You changed everything for me." And he let it slip away over a refrigerator photograph. But there's another layer to this story, and it's one that Cliff, at 85, is now beginning to articulate more openly than ever before. What Cliff understands now about Elvis that he didn't then. Because here's what we know about Elvis Presley in 1976, that very few people fully grasped at the time. He wasn't just a man who'd gained weight. He was a man who was profoundly, desperately lonely. A man trapped by his own legend, surrounded by people on his payroll, isolated from authentic human connection, dependent on prescription medication, and, many biographers have argued, essentially kept prisoner by a life that had long since spun beyond his control. The fat Elvis caricature that became such a lazy cultural shorthand in the years after his death was always a cruel reduction. The bloating, the erratic behavior, the physical decline, these were symptoms of something far darker and more human. And Cliff Richard, speaking in his more recent interviews and at this late stage of his life, seems to genuinely understand this now in a way he perhaps didn't in 1976. He talks about Elvis's later years with something approaching tenderness, not as a caricature, but as a man burdened by extraordinary circumstances. A lonely, isolated figure, a spiritual person, deeply spiritual, kind, and generous, in Cliff's own words, who happened to be consumed by a machine bigger than himself. Cliff Richard, of all people, has some basis to understand that. He has spoken publicly and at length about his own 4 terrible years, a reference to the deeply traumatic period following false allegations made against him in 2014. He described that period as horrific and emotionally draining, like being in thick mud with no way out. He spoke about the sustaining power of faith and friends. He survived it. Many might not have. And perhaps it's that experience, that period of profound public suffering and private isolation, that has given Cliff a new lens through which to view Elvis's final years. Not the pompadour and the jumpsuit, not the caricature on a Vegas marquee, but a human being, overwhelmed and desperately in need of genuine connection, which makes what Cliff did in 1976, choosing not to meet him because of a photograph, feel even more bittersweet in retrospect. Because maybe what Elvis needed in those final months wasn't another show or another hit record. Maybe he just needed someone to knock on the door and say, "You changed my life. You matter. Here I am." Cliff had that chance. He didn't take it. And now at 85, he's left carrying the weight of what didn't happen. The viral moment, the backlash, and what Allison Hammond did. Let's come back to that, this morning moment, because it deserves a closer look. Because beyond the outrage, which was real and valid, there was something else happening in that studio that day. Allison Hammond, one of Britain's most beloved television personalities, was sitting right there when Cliff made his comment. And her reaction, caught on camera, shared thousands of times, said everything that needed saying without her having to say much at all. Many viewers praised Hammond for calling out the comment in the moment. It was a masterclass in the kind of quiet, in-the-moment accountability that is very rare in celebrity television. No lecture, no heated confrontation, just a visible, human response to something that didn't sit right. And the internet did the rest. The clip spread across X, formerly Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, Reddit. It racked up thousands of likes and hundreds of comments. People were furious. People were baffled. Some were genuinely upset on behalf of Elvis Presley, a man who died nearly 50 years ago, but whose legacy, whose humanity, people still feel fiercely protective of. Because Elvis Presley wasn't just a pop star, he was a cultural phenomenon who came from poverty, broke every barrier imaginable, and gave something to the world that the world had never had before. And to reduce his final chapter to a question of whether he'd look good enough in a photo, that cut deep. Now, to be scrupulously fair, and this matters, Cliff Richard was not being deliberately cruel. The comment was thoughtless, not malicious. He told the story with the lightness of a man recounting a funny anecdote from decades past, apparently unaware of how the body-shaming element would land in 2023. He is, by all accounts, a kind and decent man. He is also, clearly, a man of his generation, and body-shaming was, for a long time, simply not something people thought to examine. But the rules have changed, and the court of public opinion moved fast. What's interesting, and actually rather admirable, is what Cliff did next. He didn't double down. He didn't dismiss the backlash. Instead, he leaned into the regret. He reframed the story. He moved away from the refrigerator photograph quip and towards something more honest. He said he was stupid, that he regretted it, and urged people not to make the same mistake he had. At 85, that takes a certain kind of grace. The lessons from a legend delivered late. And so here we are. Cliff Richard, born Harry Roger Webb in British India, raised in modest Hertfordshire, the boy who picked potatoes in the mud for $1 an hour just to buy an Elvis Presley record, is 85 years old. He is the third top-selling artist in UK singles chart history, behind the Beatles and Elvis Presley. He holds records that may never be broken. He has outlasted virtually every peer from his generation, and still, Elvis Presley haunts him, not in a dark way, in the way that great influences always haunt those they transform, in the way that an unreturned kindness sits at the edges of consciousness forever. Cliff's memoir, A Head Full of Music, published in 2023, is in many ways a love letter to the music that shaped him, and chief among those loves is Elvis. The book begins with that sunny Saturday in May 1956, that green Citroen and the sound of Heartbreak Hotel wafting through the window. The moment a 15-year-old Harry Webb fell in love with rock and roll and found the purpose that would shape his entire life. He writes with affection, he writes with gratitude, and he writes between the lines and sometimes right on them, with the bittersweet ache of things left unsaid and meetings never had. In the book's closing sentiments on Elvis, Cliff writes that he still feels like he owes Elvis everything, that on many mornings in Barbados, gazing at the Caribbean, he wonders how he got from Cheshunt to there, And the answer, every time, is Elvis Presley. The lesson Cliff has extracted from all of this, from the bad Nauheim door, from the journalist's offer, from the refrigerator photograph that never was, is deceptively simple. He now tells people that if they have a feeling they want to meet somebody, they should disregard any temptation to wait and just go and say hello if they can. Cliff Richard has had a life so full of achievement that most people could only dream of a fraction of it. He has had hits in 5 consecutive decades. He has been knighted. He has sold records in numbers that stagger the imagination. He has outlived most of his contemporaries and is still, at 85, releasing music and doing interviews and showing up. And yet, the thing that seems to stay with him most, the story he keeps returning to in interview after interview, in memoir after memoir, is the one about the meeting that didn't happen. The king he never shook hands with. The photograph that never existed. At 85, Cliff Richard has finally broken his silence on Elvis Presley. And what's emerged is not a simple story. It's not just a scandal about body shaming, though that element is real and worth examining. It's not just a piece of vintage celebrity gossip, though it's certainly that too. It's the story of a boy who heard a sound through a car window in 1956 and was so electrified by it that he picked potatoes for a shilling an hour, styled his hair for hours in the mirror, knocked on a door in Bad Nauheim, and then ran away. Promoted himself as Britain's Elvis, while insisting there could never be an answer to the original. And then, when the chance finally came to say thank you in person, said, "Not today," and lived with that for the rest of his life. He still feels like he owes Elvis everything. And at 85, talking to cameras and radio hosts and journalists, still repeating the same story of regret and love and missed connection. Maybe this is the only way he knows how to repay the debt, by telling the story again and again, by letting the world know Elvis Presley changed everything. Don't make the mistake he made. When you have the chance, go. Say hello. Don't wait for the photo to be perfect. The king isn't waiting for you to be ready, and one day he'll be gone. So there it is, the full story. Cliff Richard, Elvis Presley, a refrigerator photograph that never happened, a lifetime of regret that absolutely did. If you enjoyed this video, drop a like and let me know in the comments. Whose side are you on? Was Cliff's comment on This Morning unforgivable? Or was it just a clumsy old man being honest? And do you think Cliff's regret is genuine? Or is this just great book promotion? Subscribe if you're new here, because we go deep on the stories behind the stars that the mainstream media barely scratches. And share this with someone who grew up with Cliff Richard or Elvis Presley, because, trust me, they're going to want to watch this. See you in the next one.